Black Friday has long been regarded as a date cursed with bad luck. People often use this day as an excuse to engage in scary-themed activities, but this year, it falls in October for the first time since 2017. In this video, we're focusing on some genuinely spine-chilling events that have taken place on this notorious day of ill fortune. Tupac Shakur, widely known by his stage name Tupac, was an American rapper considered one of the most influential and successful in the history of rap. However, on the night of September 7, 1996, Tupac was in Las Vegas celebrating his business partner's birthday and attending the Bruce Seldon vs. Mike Tyson boxing match with Suge Knight at the MGM Grand. Later that night, around 11:15 p.m., while they were at a stoplight, a white four-door Cadillac sedan pulled up to the passenger side of Tupac's car, and an occupant fired several shots into the vehicle. Tupac was hit 4 times, and he succumbed to his injuries 6 days later on September 13th, which happened to be a Friday. The case remained unsolved for years, with suspicions falling on his associate Suge Knight and even rapper Biggie Smalls. However, recently, on September 29, 2023, a 60-year-old named Dwayne Keith Davis was charged in connection with Tupac's murder. Dwayne is not accused of being the actual shooter, but he is allegedly linked to ordering the hit on Tupac. The trial is still ongoing. Many people avoided flying on Friday the 13th, and while this may be due to superstition for some, there have been a few aviation tragedies on this date. In October 1972, on Friday the 13th, a flight bound for Chile was forced to crash land in the Andes Mountains. The flight was carrying 45 passengers and crew, including 19 members of the Old Christians Club rugby union team along with their families, supporters, and friends. 3 crew members and 9 passengers died immediately, with several more succumbing to injuries and cold temperature. Shortly after, survivors were forced to resort to cannibalism to stay alive. While waiting for rescue, the mission to save them was initially called off after 10 days. But 72 days after the crash, 2 survivors managed to hike to Chile to seek help, leading to the rescue of the remaining survivors. Shockingly, on the very same Friday the 13th, another plane crash occurred, taking the lives of all 164 passengers and 10 flight crew. It was Aeroflot 217, which crashed during landing in Russia just 3 miles from the runway. Due to extreme weather conditions, the exact cause of the crash couldn't be determined, but human error was suspected to be a significant factor. This incident remains one of the deadliest plane crashes in history. Although such events are exceedingly rare, there may be a reason why flights are cheaper on Friday the 13th. For those who are not superstitious, it might be worth considering. Moving from the sky to the sea, we delve into the Costa Concordia disaster. On Friday the 13th in January 2012, the 8-year-old Costa Cruises ship, Costa Concordia, had just left Civitavecchia, Italy. As it approached Giglio Island, it deviated from its standard course to perform a maritime salute, which involved sounding the ship's horn for onlookers on land. However, the ship hit underwater rocks, causing severe damage to its port side. The Concordia listed and partially sank, resting unevenly on an underwater ledge. Despite a 6-hour rescue effort, 33 people lost their lives, and the disaster led to a massive investigation into the actions of the ship's crew and captain, Francesco Schettino, who abandoned the ship prematurely. Schettino was later found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 16 years in prison. Costa Cruises and its parent company, Carnival Corporation, faced criticism but no criminal charges. David D'Anthony McGreevy, born in Southport, England, in 1951, had a tumultuous life. He joined the Royal Navy at a young age, but was discharged after starting a fire that destroyed a mess wardroom. Facing personal and professional setbacks, he moved in with his friends Clive Kenneth Ralph and Dorothy Elsie Ralph. On one fateful Friday the 13th in April 1973, David, under the influence of alcohol, committed an unspeakable act of violence. He brutally murdered the Ralph children, who he had been caring for, and further mutilated their bodies. David was arrested, confessed to the crimes, and was sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. After spending 45 years behind bars, he was eventually cleared for release in December 2018 by a parole board that believed he had changed significantly and was no longer a risk. Karakuma, the so-called symbol of bad luck, is a date that many superstitious people avoid. But in the end, whether it's Friday the 13th or any other date, life surprises and tragedies can occur on any day. In a town shrouded in an atmosphere of fear, dense forests stretched around its outskirts, the town's residents had been filled with apprehension as the approach of every Friday the 13th neared for years. This was because, in this town, every year at this time, strange events would shake it. The town's youth had grown weary of this annual tradition. Yet, every Friday the 13th night, they would hear strange noises emanating from the dark forest. Some believed it was the work of ghosts or spirits. Others feared the cruel power of a demon lurking beneath the forest. But the real truth was, on Friday the 13th night, there was a feast to behold. This year's Friday the 13th was different. The townsfolk were planning a rebellion. Led by a group of young people, the youth were determined to find out what was happening in the forest. As the sun set, the brave youth set out towards the forest. As they ventured deeper into the forest, where shadows and silence ruled, they began to understand the source of the strange noises. When they reached the depths of the deep forest, they stood frozen at the sight illuminated by the moonlight. In the forest, there were hundreds of creatures gathered for a Friday the 13th feast. They seemed to be reviving a dark ancient ritual. They were dressed strangely, wearing masks and adorned with mysterious symbols. These creatures were the ones who kept these strange traditions of their town alive for years. The youth silently decided to return. They had to accept the truth that they could not escape their town's dark traditions. Friday the 13th would return every year, and the townspeople would continue to live under the shadow of these peculiar creatures. When they returned to the town, they didn't tell anyone about the nightmare they had witnessed. Every Friday the 13th, they would continue to await the mysterious feast that took place in the depths of the secretive forest. For years, the people of the town shivered with fear as the season of Friday the 13th approached. This date had become synonymous with a mysterious tradition, hidden deep within an old forest on the outskirts of the town. Some sought to escape this tradition, while others were determined to keep the peculiar ritual alive. The town's elders would share the origin of this tradition in hushed tones, looking around cautiously to prevent the children from overhearing. According to the stories, centuries ago, this forest was known as a gathering place for dark forces. And every Friday the 13th, the town's youth would claim strange occurrences in the forest. This year, a group of brave and curious young people decided to end Friday the 13th once and for all. Were the stories just legends? Or did they truly represent the workings of dark forces? The young folk set out to find the answer by venturing into the forest. Armed with their courage and flashlights, they pierced the darkness of the woods. When they reached the heart of the deep forest, the sight before them took their breath away. An ancient square had been set up with mysterious symbols carved into the surrounding trees and rocks. On the ground, people in peculiar attire were dancing around fires. Each one of them seemed to be gathered for the ritual. At the center of the ritual, a strange statue stood. The statue was adorned with a face representing dark gods. The young people watched this scene in astonishment, with no idea of what to do next. Suddenly, they heard a chilling scream emanating from the depths of the forest, sending shivers down their spines. This scream, believed to be the spirit of the creatures, filled them with dread. However, the young people were resolute and had no intention of turning back. As the ritual progressed, the statue, marked with mysterious symbols, began to move. The young people felt as though they were being controlled by some force. Before they could comprehend what was happening, a group of creatures surrounded them. It was the moment They faced the dark traditions of their town's past. The young people were forced to be a part of the ritual. Their fears and curiosities were used to complete the ritual offerings to the dark gods. They could never forget these strange and terrifying moments. Every time Friday the 13th came, the townsfolk continued to celebrate this mysterious ritual. These peculiar celebrations had now become a tradition among the youth, and the fate of the town's residents was sealed. No one truly understood what was happening, but on Friday the 13th nights, they had to contend with the dark forces within the forest. The townsfolk had to accept the harsh truth that they could not escape this tradition. Friday the 13th would return every year, and the townspeople would continue to live under the shadow of the dark gods.